Okay, folks. So let's get going here. First off, let's talk. I'm going to kind of seed things with a question here for both Andrew and Taylor, which is, what is it that you guys disagree on most right now? Let's start the conversation there, and then we'll kick it over to some
Does
of
it
these
need to be
questions
Black
as
Friday
we'll
specific?
unroll in. I don't know. Is there anything Black Friday specific?
I think there's one just media buying tactical thing that's kind of small, but
I think we could let's do creative strategy, which is the thing that I'm thinking the most about, which actually is a little broader than Black Friday. And then we could do the media buying Black Friday specific one too. Taylor, I feel like I usually get to speak first on these. Why don't you, I mean, I don't know, you should go.
So you want me to comment on both of those?
Start with creative stuff. Tell me what I'm wrong about with my take to creative, or should I state it and then you can tell me why it's wrong?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll tell you my position and then
Yeah.
rather than representing each other. So my general disposition is that it's almost impossible, and I have never met a person who can actually predict creative performance or has unique insight into their ability to deliver novel creative solutions that repeatedly outperform other ads, and that endeavor is sort of a fool's errand. And so the game should be to define a standard of quality and expectation that's related to your brand identity that matters to you, and then repeatedly try to drive as much volume that crosses that threshold as possible. And Black Friday in particular is one of these moments when I see people spend a bunch of time on Black Friday, Cyber Monday graphics only to see their Evergreen Ads outperform it all and get sort of frustrated and wasted. And I think more than anything, what I see about Black Friday, and this I think is something you'll actually agree with, is that the clarity of the offer is the key to the ad format. Is that the ad that I see work best all the time, and this is like sort of an old principle in, like, you'll see, what is the word I'm looking for? Nordstrom's is what kind of retailer? Anyways, the word's eluding me. But the idea is like big red card, 50% off. Like
Department store?
Department store. That's what, like department store sales, right? It's like the anniversary sale, 40% off. And that's like, there's no like cool images of people doing lifestyle things. It's literally just that, words on a big red thing, and it's clarity of the message. Everyone knows it's Black Friday. Everyone's looking for deals. Make your deal prevalent and clear and easy to understand and interact with. And so I just think for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, it's like, yeah, you could try and come up with like the coolest visuals that you could ever want, or a long form explainer about your offer. But I think you're probably going to end up with mostly your Evergreen Ads scaling effectively, and then the clearest message that you have winning too.
Yeah. So for Black Friday, I mean, this is like one of those things that people who are in this, who came for Black Friday advice, should hear really, really clearly. Like, your Black Friday ads, this is like the time of year where still images end up crushing your videos, because like you can do what you just said in a still image. Not always, right? There's exceptions to all these rules, but there's where your still images just like can so much, at least at the level of your true sale creative. Still images just do a great job of promoting an offer. Like, so they like, just like if you have, even if you have like a tiered discount where it's like, you know, $20, get 20% off, $30, get 30% off, you know, whatever, like something like that. If you just put up to 40% off, if that's your offer on a still image of your product, like it's probably going to work on Black Friday. It's just like clarity about the most compelling thing about your product. And right now, in this moment, the most compelling thing about your product is the deal that you're offering at. So that's just like, it should just plaster that. Like, I just think we just ran so many ads at 4x400, at Kalo, for Brands Now, like where it's just like so simple and so straightforward. And no matter what else we did and other creative stuff we did, it did that. At the very least, what you absolutely should go and do right now is get like 10 to 20 pieces of images of your product. You know, if you have one product or two products or whatever, like just get a bunch of variation, make the images look as different as possible, but still be focusing on your product. Slap some up to 50% off or whatever your offer is on there, and just load them in flexible ad creatives with a cost cap or a ROAS target or whatever, and put them into your account. Like, it's just like, it's sort of just like checking a box at Black Friday that you should do, because all the cleverness in the world often will not beat that. And then what will happen is your Evergreen ads will scale alongside that. And you never know like how those are working together, right? Somebody might click on your Evergreen ad first and then get retargeted with your BFCM offer, or maybe the other way, you know, something like that. So yeah, that's that kind of thing I would do for sure. And I think it nicely illustrates the problem with what you're saying, Taylor, about this sort of quantity thing, which is that clarity about the most compelling thing about your product works. And so now it's really hard to do that, because actually the most compelling thing about your product may change relative to lots of different customers. And this is like a big kick I'm on, which is like, you know, I have a supplement client, right? Like a client might take a fish oil, one customer might take a fish oil supplement for one reason, and another customer might take the exact same supplement for a very different reason, because it has multiple benefits for people and they're trying to do different things, whatever. So what I would say is even if you're right, and this is something where it's actually too hard for me to disagree with you too hard. I see your point that there's a real value to volume. And I in the last couple months, I've put out podcasts that are here's how I turn one idea into 300 ads, cause I'm pro volume. But I think one of the big things for me right now is that the way you build an ad account and direct response advertising, and I'm thinking especially of brands within, I don't know, I'm thinking especially around probably early 8-figure brands and below is probably especially the kind of person I have in mind. So this may change as you get bigger, et cetera, because you may have already solved this problem. But for those brands, so much of the creative challenge is the ability to understand more deeply really specific groups of customers and to speak to that as clearly and directly as possible. And I think that work, the work of doing that is not just the work of AI spaghetti at the wall. I think that's I think there actually is real value to going and digging into those things and then trying to create a creative process where you are generating those angles at scale. And once you start to find those, then to do more and more and more of it with as much variation as possible. And probably at that point is where the volume becomes really helpful once you've got angles that are working, because now you want to create as much variability in style around those as possible. And so I think there just is a kind of work there. Though I agree, people are hilariously bad at predicting these things in the future, and that maybe less people have this skill than you think, but or than a lot of people think. But I just think there's so much more value in that than the way that you tend to frame it.
Well, so
take that, Jake Paul.
You do this thing where you you denigrate AI, where you go AI spaghetti. It's this subtle way of trying to undermine the value of the tool, but it actually does the thing you're describing infinitely better than you, which is if I were to write that prompt and I were to give it a product, let's say fish oil, and I were to say, give me 500 different audience segments where there would be a unique value proposition to a very specific persona, it could instantly provide that for you.
Yeah.
So that's where I just go that. It's just the idea that is somehow a human endeavor or the AI would be bad at, and that creates spaghetti is just that. One, I think there's a little bit of I don't know if it's bias or you have this feeling about AI, but I actually think that that's what it's really, really useful for something like that. And then second, my bigger problem is that even if you do that work, which I could call good creative diversity, is that your ability to predict which of those will work is zero. So the problem is that you have to create, or what most people are doing is they're creating a hierarchic decision of which one they start with first. And then they go spend money on it based on their assumption about the performance. And I just go that's where the waste begins, is the assumption of which angle will work best for which person. And so I just think that that's where I go hey, I have no problem with the idea of exactly what you're describing, which is diverse creative with specific value propositions to unique audiences. Where I think the lying starts is when someone begins to assert which one will work best and why, because the problem is the corresponding piece that you don't know is the price of the market of the inventory for any of those pieces. And so without understanding the market, it'd be like looking at stocks without knowing the baseline price that you're beginning with. Because we don't have that single data point about the price of the inventory that we're advertising on, we can never win this game. You can't make predictions into a market where you don't have visibility to the price that you're paying. It's just that alone, let alone the actual appeal of your product and your angle relative to all the other market options at the price that it presently is. There's just infinite dynamics that contribute to the reception of that product and the conversion rate in any moment to make it a worthwhile exercise for somebody to force rank those based on which will perform and do that effectively.
All right. Let's.
I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I don't want to derail us too much.
Yeah.
So.
Let's cut in here because the questions are pouring in. So let's start hitting them.
Okay.
So I'm going to go through here. I'm going to try to.
I just want to make sure everybody knows that I think Taylor was wrong about a lot of what he just said.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to try my best to go in order, but I'm going to have to cherry pick a little bit to make sure they're questions that are super clear here. So first, we're going to go with Casey, one of our admission members. Casey, thanks for joining us. He asked, how do you decide cost bid caps when you're sending traffic to a BFCM sales lander where the cart value can vary a ton? Start with you, Andrew.
Sure. This actually kind of gets at some of the things that we maybe also disagree on, but let's start with the baseline thing. You determine it based on your unit economics and a hypothesis first, and then you adjust it in real time. So let's make a distinction here between two kinds of bidding. One of the most misunderstood things in all of meta media buying is people will say there's cost caps over here, and then there's lowest cost over here. But cost caps, in fact, are lowest cost bidding. And what I mean by that is that they are not auto bidding. They are manual versions of a lowest cost bid. What I mean by that is that cost caps and bid caps are optimizing for the lowest possible CAC, right? So basically that means there's two variables that Meta has to factor in here, which is your click-through rate or your cost per click, and then your conversion rate. And that's going to basically determine your CAC in any given situation. There's actually a bunch of other variables behind those, but those are basically the two issues. So cost per click, click-through rate, basically the same thing, actually, as it turns out. And then conversion rate. What it does not need to predict for it to deter for your lowest cost advertising is your AOV. The AOV has nothing to do with that decision. And so that means that one of the core, people ask me sometimes, like, when do you adjust cost caps or bid caps? And the answer to the question is you adjust it relative to the AOV you're getting. That's actually the number one adjustment I actually manually make in ad accounts, because your CAC target is determined by your unit economics and then the goals of your business, right? And there's a lot more you could say about that. But let's say you have a $100 AOV and you know your COGS and all those things, and then you've got to factor in your discount, which is a thing that people miss in this calculation a lot. What is your margin net of your discount for BFCM? Then you should have some kind of a target relative to that. Now, the problem that just got referenced is that what happens if you're launching a bunch of different offers on one page? And Taylor, maybe you have a better solution to this, right?
Well, isn't it just value optimized min ROAS? Like, is this your long way of getting to that?
So I actually think you should run both, but on this CAC side, like, the other thing I would say is you, at the lowest cost level, right, at the cost cap, bid cap level, you should take this relative to the average. And some of your purchases are going to be extra profitable. Some of them are going to be less profitable. And there's just no other way to do it. You're just gonna have to take the blended average, okay? So if you're optimizing for cost cap, bid cap, which a lot of people are, this is the reason I belabored this point, because a lot of people are, that's what you do. But what you just brought up is the other thing, which is that if you run highest minimum target ROAS bidding, right, that is actually a highest value optimization, and now AOV comes into the picture, which is why you can optimize for ROAS, not just for CAC. And because if you don't have the value, you can't do ROAS, right? So yeah, at that point, that's the other thing you would do, is you'd optimize for highest value, which is target ROAS. And in that case, theoretically, what Meta is going to find you is actually higher value customers too. So it's not just that you are including the AOV in the calculation, it's that you're also pushing Meta to go up market, basically, relative to your market. So that's the way I would handle it. And then I would do both of those based on your unit economics.
Yeah, I think that more and more I live in the camp that almost the vast majority of brands, with the exception of those with a very, very narrow SKU set or a very, very clear offer to a locked-in lender, should be running value optimized min ROAS. I think that one of the biggest errors in
probably 70% of our spend.
Okay, so that's good, because I think the thing that you're describing, where you go in and adjust bids relative to AOV, is a horrible, horrible thing to do. Because I think you're doing the same kind of thing that you would critique someone to do with creative testing, which is you're looking at small samples of random bits of orders that come in and you're using an average versus looking at mean or median and mode. Like, you're not actually considering good data there to make those adjustments. And it's a constant chasing of your tail that actually affects the bidding going forward relative to the new target. And so you assume the previous AOV on the new bid, but it actually so I want to avoid that altogether. Again, get humans out of it. You're going to hear that a lot from me, whether it's creative decision-making or the media buying is. And I think min ROAS with value optimized offers you the best chance to do that. So I think that more and more, that's the preferred distribution. And because the reality is that CAC is a terrible metric in isolation. Like, when I see businesses that run off of like a CAC target, I just go like, ooh, big, hairy problem potential there, because the relative value, it has to include the value of the purchase. Like, you can't just look at CAC in isolation ever. You have to include it relative to the value of what it's acquiring. It's a cost to acquire what? To acquire how much money is the important piece there. That's why we prefer AMER on the new customer acquisition side versus NCAC or anything like that. And bidding is sort of the same thing, where minimum ROAS allows you to push towards the highest value, which also helps revenue growth. Like, a lot of businesses, the other thing I think gets underappreciated maybe by us in dialogue is that brands want top line revenue growth. Whether they want profitability first, that becomes a priori, but no one goes, oh, okay, I just want profit growth and I don't want my business to grow on the top line at all. That's not actually what anybody wants. So value optimization also drives for the total dollar value to increase as well.
The only problem with what you're saying is that you actually will leave customers on the table if you do that. Because I agree with you about every shortcoming you just referenced. It's manual, all these things. I think what I decide is just like which side I'm going to miss on. Like, and it depends on the client. Like a super high LTV client, I'm willing to miss on the side of volume. A client that really needs to be profitable on first purchase, I'm going to miss on the side of efficiency, et cetera. But if every customer exists on a range of like the highest value customer to the lowest value customer, right? Your target ROAS bidding will actually skew you towards this side because it's actually pursuing the highest value. Like because
it's pursuing a relationship between CAC and value. That's what the target ROAS does. It actually solves for that problem. It actually demands that there's a relationship between the conversion and the efficiency of that conversion and the value. So that may not exist at the upper bound. It may actually be true that on the upper bound of price, that relationship is violated. And so the actual place where conversion rate and value lead to the efficiency that you want is further down that spectrum.
I think you, I don't know if I think that's true of the actual bidding method, but I'll pause there. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's why I like TROAS. Like in theory, is that's the thing. What I want more than anything else, and this is like there's a crowd that sort of would say that ROAS is a poor measure. I think it's ultimately the only measure of advertising.
Yeah.
It's like the actual thing that you care about is like you put in dollars. How many dollars did you get back? And you could do that on a marginal basis, of course, but that's ultimately the thing you want. That every client, every advertiser is ultimately going to measure the efficacy of their media on that. You could call it ROIC, you could call it ROAS, you could call it marginal return, you can call it whatever you want. At the end of the day, it's an assessment of an investment and a return. And so I think that's the relationship that you want to protect as closely as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I guess when I run only one version of them, it does tend to produce less total spend, and all of the spend is at a target that is profitable to me. So I'm actually now thinking through, I wonder if I have that wrong. I wonder if, but I mean, I will say when I run both in an account, which I run for almost all my accounts, it is 70 to 75% to ROAS, maybe 80%. Like the highest value spend eats it up. And if you're only running lowest cost, you are absolutely leaving customers on the table on the top end of the value spectrum.
For sure.
It definitely works the other direction for sure.
I agree.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Right. Let's jump into another question here. Keep rolling through because we got a lot to get to here. So this question comes from Volger, who's also an admission member. He asks an interesting question, which I think applies to a lot of accounts that we see, which is for new ads accounts or ad accounts. Would you recommend starting during this BFCM season or waiting until after this period, considering the warm up? If so, how would you do it?
What do you think, Taylor?
What's the product? This is one of those questions that's like, I think the question is it a good product for Black Friday, Cyber Monday? Do you have any pixel history at all? Are we talking at like zero? Like where are we at? What's your cash requirements? Like how efficient do you have to be out of the gate? I think I would want a lot more context on that question. I actually kind of tend to think there's no great time to start a brand new fresh ad count. You're probably it's gonna be hard for a while, barring having some amazing, incredible product. And so put on your cost controls and get hammering away whenever you can. I do think that the data from an ECR basis that you'll develop on the ad account early on will be not that useful long-term. So, but I don't know how to assess the actual implication of that on the long-term health of the ad account. It's kind of hard to say. I know I got my head kicked in once launching a brand on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, but that is very small anecdote.
So did I. And I think the truth is I don't have a problem with launching a brand anytime for exactly the reason you said, Taylor, which is that I have it's going to be hard anytime you do it. And I think the question is, just be ready to lose some money if you're going to. It's just, but that's probably what you should be thinking about if you're starting a brand in general. Like it's just inherently risky exercise, right? So yeah, I don't have a problem with launching it now.
I think I would launch a brand let me just say, I think the launch story of the brand should actually be thought through in a way that involves a little bit more surrounding support, where you should launch it when you're ready to drive the first 100 purchases through friends and family and just grinding out some manual energy to where you're going to guarantee that there's a set of engagement around the product because you've set up a launch of your business. So I think that part of it's probably bigger than the ad account to me than just which day do I randomly decide to turn on Facebook ads? I don't know, probably the day you decide to go public and have all your friends post about it. You're sending emails to all your personal email list. You're pulling on every thread that you have to get your brand out into the world. And then in support of that, you should run some Facebook ads.
Yeah. I think I'm fine with that. And I think I'm actually not a great person to answer your question. The more I think about it, the more I think I haven't done that for a little while. And yeah, I wouldn't launch it with inflated budgets on day one. I would probably keep the budget real close to an amount of money that you're comfortable losing. And I would.
What if you think of, aren't you potentially thinking through this problem yourself? Imagine you had a brand, Andrew. Let's just imagine.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. But if you did, would you just think about it for yourself? Would you launch ads Black Friday or would you wait?
I wouldn't launch them on Black Friday, probably. Yeah, sure I would. Why not?
Yeah, that's what I think too. I think you would try it and see what happens.
Yeah.
because there's no great evidence in either direction that it's good or bad. And so it'd be like, yeah, let's find out.
Yeah. I think if I was to launch a brand that potentially had meaningful holiday resonance, for example, then yeah, I would probably do that. Why not?
Cool. All right,
Right,
let's jump to our next Black Friday. Oh, by the way, point of order, because you just called me Richard. For those of you who don't know, I'm not Corey Hamilton. This is Corey Hamilton's webinar account. He had the CTC webinar account. That's why I'm coming through this way. But my name is Richard Gaff. Anyway, let's move on to our next question here. Another Black Friday specific one, which which I think we've covered to some extent. But Adam, who is again another admission member, asks, for Black Friday itself, what is the big what are we bidding? ROAS, bid cap, or cost per result goal?
Mine doesn't change at all for Black Friday. I'm bidding both. This is a good point to get to. Here's the fundamental challenge, right? Those tools all work off of past data that inform, and in fact, all Meta advertising tools, right? They work off an expected conversion rate. And the idea is that Meta is predicting the conversion rate of your traffic on your website before it enters you into an auction. And that is how it enters you into the auctions that it enters you into. And in manual bids, this becomes a really big deal because that's how it calculates the target, the bid cap, the cost cap, or the target ROAS, right? So that little ECR calculation, right? Expected conversion rate is really crucial. There's a obvious challenge to that. So one of the things that makes this a great tool is that the tool is way less responsive to small sample noise than my lizard brain is, right? I'm like, oh, 5 purchases in a row. This adds a winner. Scale it to the moon. Let's go, But Meta's going to be like, no, hold on. That's like 5 purchases. Doesn't mean that much. So if there's a sudden shift where the conversion rate looks better one day than another day, it's a problem. So that means when you get to Black Friday, where there will be a sudden shift in conversion rate, and crucially, it will be real, right? Like you will get let's say it's a 40% lift, even if you're already running your sale on Thursday, and I've just made that number up, okay? Then that means the expected conversion rate is going to be 40% too low for that day relative to what's before. So what you can do, that this should be noted, and I want to be as crystal clear as possible before somebody gets mad at me for blowing their money, is that this is risky, okay? But you can basically go pre-juice all of your bid caps, cost caps, or target ROAS targets to the tune of however much you expect that adjustment to be to start the day so that you launch a little hotter. That will potentially capture more volume at your target. And then you would, over time, throughout the day, at intervals that nobody really knows, you would move it back towards what you think the actual average is going to be. Probably the less you're spending, the more you sort of have to do something like this if you want to capture the moment, because the data is going to pile up slower. If you are spending $30,000 a day right now, $40,000 a day, this is probably less of a big deal for you because you're just going to get a bunch of purchases really fast. Meta's going to learn very quickly that the conversion rate is real because you're getting plenty of data, and it's going to go, etc. But that is what I'd say. So I'm running bid caps and target ROAS both for my clients. I don't know what the CTC playbook is here, but yeah, if I was going to do that though, one thing I will tell you, if I was going to proactively adjust that, is I would put my budget somewhere that isn't crazy, right? So I wouldn't have $1 million budget to start the day if I was going to go proactively adjust those targets, because I could be wrong. So yeah, if you want to go for it, you could, that would be a way to chase some additional volume here. That to me seems totally legitimate and reasonable within the tool, but that has some extra risk to it. Probably if it was me running a brand, I would just take the extra profit. I would just go like, oh, I'll probably take a little less volume than I could. If I really want to push it, maybe I'll adjust it up a little bit, but there you go. That's my take.
Yeah, I will probably go the other way, which is that we tighten all of our expectations because of the marginal difference with the discount. And I think the idea that we couldn't assume Meta's algorithm to account for Black Friday having expected increases in ECR would be like crazy. Like that's like a baseline modeling exercise that if you were to try and model out, like if we were to just hand draw a line of estimated conversion rate, we would all draw a bump and Friday. So the idea that the complexity of this machine learning couldn't account for that is like just not a variable that I feel like I want to hand to a human, unless someone tells me, nope, Meta's algorithm only works on the last 7 days of expected conversion rate and has no capacity to understand what happens on Black Friday, in which case I would say, all right, I guess we'll make that manual adjustment.
Yeah.
I think it's raw. The problem then though is like, how much do you adjust it?
Yeah.
Do you just go look at the expected conversion by that and you would double it?
Historically.
Like, is that like, so I think that's a very dangerous error because yeah, I just think that you have worse margin on this day. And so you actually need to be careful to protect it. And if you think about target ROAS, one of the critiques, and this is like Andrew used to be a staunch bid cap guy because the problem with TROAS is it's a blended average over time, right? So I think the other thing that'll happen is in the event that you do get more efficient in the short term, it just allows you to be more aggressive in the long term to blend out the result. And so I don't actually think there's necessarily any sacrifice to the volume as that adjustment occurs. One of the things I will say that we'll do likely is create redundancy. So there have been instances where in a highly competitive auction, I do see delivery get massively constrained for some brands, in which case we will have lowest cost campaigns available because we do see that on this day, your performance is the best it's ever going to be. And so the amount of risk associated with lowest cost is less on this day than others. And the last thing I would ever want to happen is for you to get no spend. And so it's just like a safety valve. It's a redundancy feature if something happens in a way that I don't want it to. So,
I mean, that is a hilarious self-contradiction.
the system it works imperfectly and I have to create redundancy against the imperfection.
Yeah, that's essentially exactly what I just said, except
No, but you start with the redundancy. That's the difference. That would be like me saying I start with lowest cost and switch back.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I create.
But you said it was so crazy that Meta couldn't predict this moment. But also, we're going to build that into every.
But that has to do about the competition of the feed at your bid. There may be real reason why you can't get delivery on that day at your price. That's not an
error. Don't involve those humans except for 2 hours into Black Friday when they're at their jumpiest.
No. Okay. The point at which you actually would deploy the redundancy is a separate conversation. But I don't think that.
I'm sure humans will make a great decision there. So that's great.
It's after the machine has failed, so it's secondary. It's the only. It's the only option I have at that point.
Yeah. I don't actually disagree with almost anything you just said. I think it's perfectly reasonable. I think most people have launched their sales in advance of Black Friday, and so the sort of like margin consideration should have already happened. But the margin consideration is huge, and this is also why I don't mind. Like, I also just think people chase revenue too much. Like even on these moments, it's honestly incredibly hard to sit and look at Twitter screenshots of people doing bajillions of dollars today, and you're not doing that well, or your number isn't as big. And so if you're not getting there, like there's all this pressure internally to go like create this thing. Whereas what you might actually be doing is just like printing cash on your bank account because you're just like, I'm just going to shave off the worst part of my spend anyway because it's a blended average anyway. So I think there's a great reason to not do anything I just said. Instead, to set your target ROAS, say screw the volume to some degree, and instead just like go fill up your bank account. I think that's a perfectly reasonable approach to Black Friday.
Yeah, I do think in the longest term possible that would yield the best results.
It would.
The longest term possible.
Yeah.
Like the least action would lead to the best result. I think in the longest term.
I think that's fine.
So hard. It's so hard. There's so many competing pressures on you to act. If you're sitting there and it's 9:30 and you haven't got any spend, the client is not going to be satisfied with the answer of like, hey, just wait it out. It's the right move. And I wish that were a reality, but I also am empathetic to any media buyer that's like, wait, so it's 10 a.m. Black Friday and I spent $0 on my cost controls and you want me to call the client and be like, just trust me?
Yeah, you're right.
So I get it.
Let's jump back into the questions here. This is on a slightly more strategic or maybe broad tack than some of the tactical questions we've been asking here. But an anonymous attendee asks us, every BFCM is different, but given the trends you've seen thus far this year, which prior year do you think 2024 will most closely mirror from a performance perspective? I.e., if we were looking at past BFCM performances, which year do you think this would follow the most? And maybe take that to answer the next question, which is speaking to the efficiency trends we're seeing right now compared to the same period last year and so on and so forth. So Taylor, why don't you take that one?
If you go to a different one first, I can actually pull up some data on that versus trying to.
Yeah, I'd be guessing. I'd love Taylor. Yeah. I think you've got a better days.
Go to a different question first. Let Andrew answer it, and let me pull up some data here.
My one guess is that it will be bigger in a shorter time window because it's later. That's the only guess that I would say. So you probably capture a little bit more Christmas energy and some of those things. But that's yeah.
Okay. Let me jump down a little bit to a question here from Mark Daly, who asks, can you talk a little bit about the decision making and thought process around prioritizing margin versus revenue during BFCM? I understand that margin is always king, but what's the thought process on accepting a lower margin to acquire more customers during BFCM? This is a decision between first order profitability versus LTV, I guess.
It might actually be a decision between more or less first order profitability. What I think about this is that it's almost impossible to answer this question without knowing more about your business goals. So like, here's an extreme example. When I hear Sean Frank talk about what they want to do at Ridge, he wants to build $1 billion business. Okay. That's like his goal for whatever reason. And my take is like, I won't serve customers whose goals I can't serve. Like, so Like, for example, I wouldn't work with Ridge because I can't do the thing he wants to accomplish. It's not about like a moral questioning of it. I just mean I'm just not the right guy to go try to help him do the thing that he wants to do. So, but it's not I'm not really worried so much about trying to like to evaluate that. It's just that it just is his goal. Well, in that case, if you want to build $1 billion business, you know what you have to do? You have to drive a whole bunch of revenue pretty fast, I think, depending on the timeline and some of those things. So if that was what he wants to do, he probably has to gravitate towards volume wherever he can because he needs to keep growing his business. That's my sense of things. I don't know. Maybe you could make an argument that he should gravitate towards profits so that he has the money to get there, but like whatever. That's like one way of thinking about it. I think for me, if it was my brand, right, I would probably make the decision more towards profit because of all kinds of ways that I think about the world in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish with my life and some of those things. Having said all that, I think instinctively people overvalue top line revenue and undervalue bottom line revenue, and that whether or not they're going to reinvest that bottom line revenue into their business or they're going to just take it out and put it in their pocket, that's even a separate question. Like, I just think people, generally speaking, undervalue how useful it is to have a big bottom line that is really healthy like I said, I even alluded to the idea that even for Sean, like it might be a good idea to have more bottom line dollars specifically for the sake of getting to that goal, which you're going to want to accomplish on a very long timeline. So how you think about that is I think within that broader context. And for me, like I just think that's kind of the core question. I know Taylor would have probably a modeling approach to that question as well. So like, at what point do you actually lose marginal efficiency? I think he might answer it that way, and some of those things. But yeah, I think people generally overvalue top line in these situations and undervalue bottom line. And yeah, the chase for the screenshot is a real thing.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think the answers will specifically matter relative to your overall business objective. But I think if your job is to deliver shareholder value, for most e-commerce measure, almost all these e-commerce businesses, that's measured as a multiple of your trailing 12-month EBITDA. So at any given time, if you're increasing that number, you're probably increasing shareholder value in some capacity. If your goal is to distribute cash via distribution, then your job is to produce free cash flow, which is an even higher standard than is P&L level EBITDA. So I think you have to begin the answer to this question with how are you trying to create shareholder value? What is the measure that's going to produce that? And then your media budget in any given time period should be in pursuit of that objective. So to Andrew's point, if you're trying to build $1 billion business, then maybe that's going to be, you're going to try and create a case for selling your business on a multiple of revenue to a very strategic and specific buyer. Okay. That's a game that if you've got clarity from advisors and other people that that's the real method that they want to evaluate you on, then cool, play that game. I think that's 0.0000001% of you. And so I think that most of you are probably much closer to playing a TTM EBITDA game or a cash in your bank account game. Those are likely the two games that most of us are playing. And really, I think more people should be playing the cash to the bank account game because it actually is what enables the TTM EBITDA game most often too. So in which case, like there's almost no justification for trying to generate negative contributing revenue. Real fast, let me share my screen and show a couple things. So the D2C, this is a screenshot out of CTC's D2C index. It's a subsidiary of the broader D2C index that we publish monthly. This is a newsletter that gets published weekly. This is just CTC data. So looking at all stores here for the year, you can see year over year data between 24 and 23. So I'm not going to go back any further than that. Across the year, there's a pretty consistent, like if I grab at any point in time, what you'll see is about a 10 to 12% delta between 2024 revenue and 2023 revenue. It gets smaller at some points, bigger at others. You can see the last 28 days year over year here. Spend, you can see similar patterns across that. So following a very similar 10 to 12% increase there. CAC, fragmented. I don't know if you were to draw a trend line, the y-axis is a little narrower. This doesn't start at 0. This is only about a 15% or I guess 20% delta, a little bit more than that, 50% between the top and bottom of this y-axis. You can see 24 CAC versus 23 CAC. You can see that rising through these months. We should see this drop off as we get into November, December. Some performance related stuff. So MER, again, this is always going to remain in sort of a bound. This is defined more by the marginal requirements of every business than it is seasonality because it's a ratio of efficiency. You can see that sort of bouncing around year over year, kind of bottoms out in July and August. AMER, same sort of idea. So you can see like small upside this year, relatively normative performance. Like that's what I would expect in terms of when we've been looking at the broader data set of the D2C index year to date, 8-figure brands are up around that 12 to 15% range year over year. 7-figure brands, the last 2 months have been flat year over year. So we've actually seen worse signs out of 7-figure brands more recently. But overall, the data I've seen out of like the big publications is Cyber Monday is going to be the biggest day in e-commerce history. So I expect us to be the biggest days ever. I expect them to be moderate, 8 to 12% on average for the industry. And I think that's what you should expect out of e-commerce, in barring some sort of anomalous, crazy event like COVID, has been the trend line for most years.
Makes sense. All right, let's jump into one, kind of get back into the tactical here. So we have a question on daily optimization on Black Friday. Do you optimize based, and this is a question from Nicola, do you optimize based on one-day results during the BF promo, not only the actual day, as budgets are much higher? E.g., if you had an ad that was profitable in the last 2 days, but today is taking much of the spend without results, would you turn it off?
Nope. Taylor?
Yeah, next question. Nope, never.
Yeah, I mean, if it's getting spent, it's a winner. That's like, that's so fundamental the way Taylor and I think about this.
I think it's so critical to understand, though, that is the fundamental media buyer question. Like that at the heart of it, like that's the question you should ask every media buyer in an interview. That's the question you should ask any agency that you're interviewing. That will tell you everything they think about the world in terms of their ability to impose themselves onto the outcome, and how they deal with samples and et cetera.
If the first thing I do when I take over an account for a client is I go find all the ads that media buyers turned off in the past media buyers did, and I relaunch them all. And very often there is incremental spend there. People turn off ads for all kinds of reasons that are wrong all the time. There's boatloads of data to back this up. And if you don't know, the reason why why I'm so happy to do a admission webinar, admission focused event, the reason I talk about admission on my podcast all the time and send people there is because if you want to learn why that point is so obvious to me and to Taylor, and so hard to get your head around at the same time, there is simply no better tool for like learning to think that way about your e-commerce business than admission.
All right, let's go to a question.
Can we do Damon's question? I think there's an interesting topic here.
Okay.
I think is. So the question is, how do we so I'll ask you, Andrew, and you tell me what you think. It says, how do we maximize the reach of the campaigns? For some clients, we get stuck with very high frequency and have a hard time reaching new customers, even with exclusions. We try a lot of different creatives, but they may not be different enough. Have you experienced accounts/brands that get stuck with very high frequency, low reach, which in the end gives us a high CAC?
Okay, I think about, so I don't ever optimize for reach per se. Like what I mean is I don't go like bid for reach or anything like that. When I think about this problem, I think about two things. One of them is it's not necessarily a problem at all, actually. Like, in fact, a high frequency in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. A high CAC relative to or let's call it a low ROAS for our conversation earlier, is a problem. But I don't necessarily think that's even a frequency issue. And I think it sort of gets at something you've said, Taylor, which is that like retargeting is not necessarily non-incremental. That like sometimes retargeting is exactly the next best place for your dollar to spend. So I broad target everything, excluding only past customers. And even per some of your recent conversation, Taylor, I'm even backing off on that. So in and of itself, I don't think it's a problem. I think, in fact, historical advertising, right, would be like, yeah, we want to hit the people repeatedly. We want to hit them over and over and over again, so we stay top of mind for them. It's actually a weird, like, direct response digital advertisers' way of thinking about the world. So that said, if I came to the conclusion that this really is a problem, right, and I need to go solve this problem, I think this is if you think about the idea that creative is targeting, right, in Meta's machine learning, then it's a creative problem fundamentally. You have to vary not just like formats and styles, but I would say messaging becomes the thing that you probably have to vary here. If you're hitting the same people and over and over again, you can probably solve some of that with formats and ad styles and some of those things, still versus video, different creators, whatever. But I think probably what I'd be thinking about here is like, how do I go reach a new audience? Because and that's a matter of creative. So it sort of comes back to my supplement example earlier, right? If customer A is using fish oil supplement for one reason, customer B is using it for a different reason. If you only message customer A's reason, you're going to get customer A over and over again. This is the magic of meta ads, is it finds those people, and you have to go figure out how to message customer B. And yeah, so I think that's probably the way I would think about that problem.
Yeah, I think this is there's a bunch of phrases that I'd be curious where they got constructed for you. Because I think they're wrong, but I'm just curious about this. Like when you say a very high frequency, what does that mean? Like, is that, like if we were all to write down on a piece of paper right now, and we were to say, write down very high frequency, like what do you think a range of numbers would be that we would all write? I'm guessing it would be pretty broad. I think some people might say as low as like 3 is a high frequency. Some people might put it up as 12. And the question I just ask is why? Why do you believe that? And this gets back to, I have seen no relationship between any of these individual measures and performance. Like I have seen no evidence that increased reach leads to decreased performance, with the one exception. Meta has published data about users interacting with an individual ad a certain number of times. So frequency on the same image. This is really important to draw a distinction in your account, because you can look at user frequency at the ad level. You could look at it at the campaign level. You could look at it at the account level. And I think they would all mean different things. So Meta has published evidence about, I call it like the third time through the batting order effect, Andrew, which is like the third time you see an ad, the performance drops off. And I'll see if I can find that and share it in admission. But so I think on an individual ad basis, there could be, and it would make sense to me that there would be a decrease in the effect over time of seeing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. But I think you have to be careful not to conflate that with frequency or reach at the account level across a broad, diverse set of creative, where that may be not have this be subject to the same dynamics. All that to say, I don't pay a lot of attention to it. I think that when you use cost controls, what should happen is that you'll get spend suppression at some point if the effects of projected future performance become probabilistically negative for you. That what Meta should do is stop spending. And that's the decision that I would trust more than my individual interpretation of some reach number.
Agree 100%.
I'm going to jump to another question here from Zach, which is interesting. This is a question specifically for Taylor, and I'm curious if Andrew disagrees or agrees. I've heard Taylor mention raising budgets as high as 3 to 4x baseline during BFCM. In prior years, we've only raised budgets roughly 30 to 40% above baseline, and last year we hit a 7x on Black Friday and Cyber Monday doing this. Do you really recommend tripling budgets on Black Friday, et cetera? And if so, what sort of diminishing returns do you see in terms of ROAS doing something like this?
So to be clear, I think tripling is like an arbitrary number. The point I'm trying to make here is that you don't want to cap out, right? Like capping out is just my way of saying you don't want to be the reason you didn't spend more is the number that you typed in the budget column when you're getting a 7x ROAS, right? And so what I really want to do is have an inflated budget that allows me to get as much available profitable volume as possible. So that is the what I'm really illustrating with the idea of triple the budgets there, is to say, I want inflated budgets with cost controls to make sure that I take all the available profitable volume that exists. And one of my big stump speeches is that I think people underspend Black Friday. And the story that I just heard from you is one that I see a lot when I go back and look at people's data, is that their efficiency on that day is so much greater on any other day of spend that they have throughout the year, that it's just sort of like, why was the standard on this day so much higher than any other day? Now, in some cases, it's because they're making up for a lot of bad spend the rest of the time. And so it's like actually the only time that they were proportionally at the right allocation relative to their marginal frontier, but that's sort of a separate conversation. So tripling is just arbitrary. It's just to say, don't let your budgets cap out if you're hitting the efficiency target.
This is all on the assumption that you're running manual bids.
Yes. Great point. Yes.
Yeah. That's the point.
Worth noting for sure.
Yes. That like, if you have a CAC target of $100 and you're running cost caps and they say $100 cost cap and your budget is still spending, let it spend. Like, let it spend. Assuming you've all done the unit economic work and all those kinds of things. And there are very often brands who end up generating 5x the volume on Black Friday that they do on other days, So yeah. Otherwise, nothing to add.
Okay, here's an interesting one from Brian, another one of our admission members. Do you change percentage spend between Meta and Google during Black Friday, Cyber Monday relative to prior months? Seems you want to keep the throttle on NC acquisition on Meta and adjust overall budget instead of shifting budget so relative percentage remains. Counter argument is to put a greater emphasis on Google as it is more demand capture. What do you all take?
I would have manual bid targets for both, and I would capture as much volume as I can on both and let the percentages fall where they may.
Yeah, I have data on this. Actually, we published it in the last D2C index about what happens to spend allocation between Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Let me see if I can pull this up for us here. And the answer is actually the opposite, is that you get more volume that gets allocated to Meta as a percentage than on other days. And that's part because it's just like the only place where there's like variable levers, right? So you can't actually scale the Google spend up a bunch, even if you want to, right? Unless you're spending on YouTube, but that's a much smaller percentage of the total spend. So it's just about the capacity for volume increase is a lot smaller on Google than it is on Meta, and Meta scales up dramatically on that day. So it actually goes the opposite direction. But again, that's not because I'm doing that intentionally. I don't think about the percentage allocation. I want the maximum available volume on both channels every day. And so I'm going to take, it's going to be TROAS on Google, going to be TROAS on Meta, and my budgets are going to be inflated, and I don't want either of them to cap out on that day.
All right, let's say one more question here, and then we'll see if you have any time afterwards. Daryl asks, I just started running new BFCM early sale campaigns. The campaigns are running a little slow and not spending, using TROAS and cost caps, but not spending much. Be patient with it or start lowering cost controls. It's been a couple of days.
If you're running auto bids also, then it's really impossible to say, like which is what a lot of people say when they say they've just launched TROAS and cost caps. Sometimes what they mean is they launch them alongside their auto bids. And then you got to go all in, and then it will determine a lot more of what to do next. I think besides that, this is the kind of highly specific ad account question that is really hard to answer without looking at the account. And I try not to answer them because I don't want to mislead you.
Yeah, I can't see many good arguments unless you've set the cost control well above your actual marginal threshold, that like capitulating to taking the worst result is going to be a good outcome. It's probably going to just deliver that at a bad outcome. And so it's like, is that what you want? Okay. If you can stomach that, or if those purchases are worth it for you in some way, then okay. But I think Andrew's right. Without some additional context, that's harder.
One of their good heuristics here is the targets are probably right. Not, so that's like a baseline thing to think about. So that means if they're not delivering at your target, then it's most likely that it's because you can't get the volume at the efficiency you want.
So this actually spills over to Andre's in here. If you guys don't know Andre, great follow.
The man, Dr. Lunev.
Yeah. And he asked a question that I think is worth addressing because it's probably the thing I'm wrestling with the most in my personal media buying style. And I think Andrew, he sort of gets at this question. And he asked like, do you adjust your bid caps or cost caps relative to performance? So, and what I have found is that the answer for me is yes. So let me explain what I mean. Like if I've been running for 2 weeks and I have a $30 CPA bid cap or cost cap, and it's at $42, I find myself lowering the target. And I actually think this is the worst behavior that I have. I think I'm really flawed at doing this, but it is so hard not to try to use tightening or widening as a leverage to get to the blended outcome that I need for the month. Because so much of the expectation placed on us as an agency is relative to a snapshot in time over a window, that I'm like, shit, if I've got a $40 CPA for 2 weeks, I now need a $20 CPA going forward to try to get to a $30 CPA for the month that I'm being held to. And so I do interact with it that way, even though what I still need tomorrow is a $30 CPA. Like that's actually what I need tomorrow, but I'm trying to get to this measurement standard that the client's going to look at me through. So it's an error, but I do find myself doing it. So Andrew, I'd be curious about if you do it.
No, I never inject my human bias into anything I do. I'm just a total machine.
Robot.
No, I do the exact same thing. I'll say I think that TROAS bidding in particular tends to produce an outcome slightly lower than the target. And I actually have a theory about why this is, which is that I think that because it's got AOV as a thing in there, there are going to be, this is just me speculating. So do it again. That occasionally you have giant outlier order sizes for most brands that actually are real, right? Like everybody gets the $10,000 order at some point, Now it happens once in a very long time, but I kind of wonder if like part of the reason that highest value TROAS targets tend to produce under that is that they're actually predicting that's going to happen because it is real. So I don't know if that's why, but they do that. So sometimes I'm running my TROAS targets more conservative than what the paper says that they should. I try to, Dave Recook and I were talking about this recently. I try to do that consistently across the account, right? So like if they consistently deliver performance 20% lower than the TROAS target is set to, then I try to make them all 20% higher, right?
Yeah.
In that case, the mechanism still works. There is a point at which I think it becomes impossible to keep doing that and not like, even if it is on paper the right decision, where like, it's like, gosh, I don't know. I think the machine learning is way better than my brain, and I'll even take a flawed version of it. Like I'm taking over me just like adjusting auto bids all the time. But there's probably some point where if it's delivering a certain outcome over a long enough time, the way I think about it is just like, which side are you willing to miss on, basically? So like for the client who really wants the volume, I'll just keep them where they are. For the client, again, this is like a question of the business dynamic. So yeah, I think that's probably the way I would think about this. I'll say, I think with bid caps, this is less of a problem. In my experience, like bid caps tend to perform truer and like more consistently relative to what I've experienced with other tools, but that's like I probably shouldn't even say that. It's like such an anecdotal nonsense thing. So yeah, I do it. I probably should do it less. And this is also a client services versus my business issue. Like there's all kinds of third-party factors, right? Like what happens if you consistently underreport by 15% relative to the true value you're creating? Like that's definitely a real thing, you know? So, there's a bunch of factors here. I agree with you, Taylor. I stand outside of myself, and the pure rational version of me mocks the irrational cost cap adjuster.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say here that I think is maybe the hardest dynamic is if you're running 7-day click, okay, you have to think that the actual allocation of today's budget, the return is supposed to be measured over
On
7 days.
Yeah, people miss this all the time.
So what you would actually have to do is spend it today and turn it off. And then look at that specific spend on a 7-day window, and then you would get the actual allocation. And this is where time of event reporting versus time of click reporting has screwed with media buyers in ways that is hard to actually fathom. Because what happens is that each day you're getting basically new cohorts of spend.
Right. You start a new 7-day cycle.
That's right. All the time. And so it's really hard on 7-day click in particular to begin to assess today's performance, because you have a convoluted noise factor of the purchases from the previous day's spend and today's spend that actually often make today never seem at target. It is perfectly reasonable that every individual day on a 7-day click basis, you could be reporting under target.
You should be.
Exactly. Yeah. And still be hitting the cost control for that actual allocation of budget. That's really hard to conceptualize. And until you stop spending, which you almost never do, you'll never realize the full value of the report. So it's really challenging to do it that way.
Yeah, this is where I spot check everything based off a forecast. Sometimes I'll look at last click and just as like a pulse check, just like, does this number look reasonably within range of what is normal for me? And I'll even keep 1-day click in my dashboard on Meta, even if I'm not like optimizing for 1-day click, just to go like, okay, is this somewhere within the range of that? But I think that's everything you said there is really right.
And it really makes me want to, especially for big brands on Black Friday, Cyber Monday, like I have a real disposition towards 1-day click because I feel like it makes some of these decision-making things easier.
I run a lot of 1-day click, man. I don't know why everybody loves it. Yeah.
Yeah. I really think that it is a easier way to sort out that problem, which creates immense noise in the measurement.
Yeah. And when you're actually at these BFCM moments, this is like a good BFCM tip. Like you don't actually want a 7-day cycle. You want people to buy right now. So you want to optimize for the right now buyers, and Meta has a thing for that, which is 1-day click. So like whenever I build any sale campaigns, any promotional campaigns I ever build, BFCM or otherwise, I always build 1-day click. Always.
I agree. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad we got to that, because I think that's how I would set up all my BFCM campaigns. If I was building something new, it'd be 1-day click for sure.
Yeah.
But you have to adjust the ROAS, right, to a lower standard. Andrew likes to look at 1 to 28. Ideally, I would have a read on 1-day click to incremental, but whatever, you have to make some adjustment to it. Is it you can't hold it to the same high standard you would a 28.1 or a 7.1.
That's right. Yeah.
But
a 1-day standard versus a 7-day standard is actually a different target. Yeah.
Yeah,
for
sure.
Cool. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Hope you got some value out of that. A lot of good questions, a lot of good answers. For those admission members who didn't get their questions answered, I'm going to go ahead and download some of the Q&A and make sure that we put it in the rotation to get those questions answered in future pieces of weekly content. But all right, folks, thanks for joining us. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, TH. Thanks, Richard.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.